Jack the Ripper was one of the most antisocial murderers Britain has ever seen. Much of the fear of the Ripper was stirred up by the press and by the way he kept killing people.
Today we are ranking the albums of Whitechapel, starting with the Somatic Defilement in 2007. A very solid debut album and actually deserving of some extra recognition for being one of the formative albums to popularize deathcore to begin with. Obviously there were bands and albums before this, but I feel like between them and Suicide Silence with The Cleansing, this is kind of what set the blueprint really in motion. It's their only album on Candlelight too, before moving to Metal Blade, and also the only one with Brandon Cagle on guitars. Mostly a concept album about Jack the Ripper with some Jeffrey Dahmer thrown in, which by the way, you probably know this if you clicked on the video, but Whitechapel is the town where the Jack the Ripper murders took place. Definitely not my favorite, and especially listening back to them now, honestly, some of these tracks feel a little bit quaint considering just how much deathcore has evolved in the past decade or so. Also, when it comes to debuts, I prefer The Cleansing, which came out this same year. Regardless, dig the strings on the title track. Ear to Ear is solid, some great pace changes and guitar work on Alone in the Morgue. Very brutal, and fair warning to newcomers, the lyrics are definitely a product of their time. Keep this one away from the TikTok kids and Gen Z Redditors.
Offensive, offensive.
But I'm putting this one at great tier. They followed that up with This Is Exile in 2008. Definitely an improvement over the debut on all levels. I would say that the production is better, as is the guitar sound and overall songwriting. Themes also shifting away from the brutality and violence to religion and corruption. Banger tracks on here too, especially the title track, Possession, Demon the Procreated, and Messiahbolical. What a great title for that one too. And the Possession music video actually got some solid rotation on Headbangers Ball. It hit Billboard Top 200 at 118, which is pretty impressive for a sophomore effort from a deathcore band in the relative infancy of the genre. Still not quite hitting the top tier for me. It's a little bit inconsistent, but I still really enjoy it. It is going to fantastic. From there, we get A New Era of Corruption in 2010. This one shot up to number 43 on Billboard, and for good reason. You can hear them becoming stronger songwriters for sure on this album in a lot of different ways, just tighter. The whole album feels a little bit more consistent, and then you've also got some really standout moments too. Chino Moreno of Deftones and Vincent Bennett of the Acacia Strain make guest appearances on Reprogrammed to Hate and Murder Sermon, respectively. I also greatly enjoy End of Flesh, Breeding Violence, and The Darkest Day of Man. Dig the album art too. Definitely hear them coming into their own at this point. Really not a dud on this one. I am putting it at perfection. They followed that up with Whitechapel in 2012. Speaking of album art, I honestly like this very simple saw blade cover with the Tennessee flag overlaid on it. It's one of my favorites. As for the music, sometimes bands put out a self-titled later in their career and it feels like sort of a throwaway thing, but this one does feel like the culmination of everything up to this point fully coming to fruition. Every track is a banger. I know I already said the last one was much more consistent, but this one is truly a front-to-back rager for me. Favorites on this one: Make It Bleed, Hate Creation, and especially Culturalist, which is one of my all-time favorite Whitechapel songs. This has been the personal favorite album for me for a long time now. It's easily my most re-listened, so this one is also going to perfection. They followed that up with Our Endless War in 2014. Now, unfortunately, after the self-titled, I feel like they kind of peaked for me for a time at least. I find this album to be fine, but also just kind of bland and unengaging. There are exceptions, of course. You gotta love that infectious groove of The Saw Is the Law, almost Meshuggah vibes on that one. Closer Diggs Road has some great dark atmosphere and a great solo on it as well. And Let Me Burn has a banger intro, but the song itself is still kind of dull for me. The mouth of hell is open wide tonight. There are some fun little like rapid fire vocal moments that tend to get me going, but overall I think that this was around the time that we were collectively realizing that the original deathcore formula was starting to get stale and we needed to evolve in many ways. So yeah, this one landed at good for me. By the way, as always, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to hit the like button, dislike if you dislike, and also comment below what are your thoughts? How would you rank these albums? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? This is just my opinion, as always. But moving on, we have Mark of the Blade in 2016. Those same problems only continue with this one, I would say, and notably this was actually the first Whitechapel album I reviewed for Metal Trenches when it was just still written reviews. In any case, it really just fell short for me on all levels. I remember being kind of excited when I got the promo for it, and then just feeling totally let down when I pressed play. As always, it does have some good moments like The Void and the title track, but ultimately it's just very mediocre. A lot of people seem to have a divisive response to the implementation of the clean vocals, which is kind of funny looking back now, but for me that was never the issue with this one. For me, it had everything to do with the songwriting and production. Everything just feels very uninspired and unmemorable, and the production is very flat and just lacks any sort of energy or impact, which sucks even more of the life out of it. The guitar sounds so compressed that it's robbed of the sort of punishment that I'm used to when it comes to Whitechapel. Not the worst thing ever, but man. The band said in an interview that they were not particularly proud of this one either, so it is landing at okay. But they followed that up with The Valley in 2019. Very clear that the band felt like it was time to shake things up after that last one. Everyone raved about this album when it came out and acted like it was the best new thing since sliced bread. So much for that I listened to it over and over and over again trying to figure out what the big deal was. And to this day, while I have found much more enjoyment in it over the years, I still feel like it was kind of overhyped.
How could you say such a thing?
I know, I'm like the only person who doesn't adore this album. I do love the cover art with its sort of giallo horror vibes, conjuring movies like Suspiria and Deep Red. It's got that Argento energy, and then just telling such a personal story comes through very genuinely, especially in the very strong singing. This path I walk is comforting, but now I'm left to sing this song. The heavy parts are still super heavy, and I appreciate very atmospheric production is back where it needs to be to further complement the experimentation. Black Bear has another nice groove. We Are One has some really sick drumming and more of a technical approach, definitely a standout for me there. Nice riffs on Lovelace, and then Doom Woods is a really solid closer with that slow kind of bluesy guitar. So even though I don't love it, I still think that objectively speaking it deserves a higher rating than especially the last two albums. I will put it at great tier. They followed that up with Kin in 2021. This was another interesting one, as I might have expected the turn they took with The Valley to be the very divisive choice, but ultimately it was this follow-up that garnered a little bit more of a split reaction. Some further praised the band's continued evolution in new directions, while others mocked it as sort of a deathcore goes butt rock album. Phil's singing becomes even more pervasive here, which I still commend him for not sounding as poppy and overly produced as some of his octane core peers. Like seriously, you can do so much worse than this. Anti-Cure, History is Silent, and Kin all have straight up ballad portions that wouldn't be out of place on a Stone Sour record, but then certain moments on Without Us and especially Orphans start to slip into full-on Nickelback or Three Doors Down kind of territory, or Default. Remember Default? It's just the way that it is, and it's hopeless now. Well, this is not for real, afraid to feel. Not all that surprising when remembering that these guys are from Knoxville, Tennessee, and frankly, I think they pull it off. Alternatively, we do still get some super heavy tracks on Lost Boy, A Blood-Soaked Symphony, To the Wolves, and ripping yet folky opener I Will Find You. Again, I respect the continued experimentation even if it doesn't always pan out, and I think that it's at least leaps and bounds better than the stale rinse and repeat blandness of, again, albums like Mark of the Blade. Deathcore Goes Country is definitely an interesting and pretty unique idea, even if the execution, again, isn't always there. I'm also putting this one at great tier. Which brings us to Hymns in Dissonance in 2025. Phil stated that they attempted to write their heaviest album to date with something that was shockingly menacing and brutal. And while I would have been skeptical hearing that a year ago, lead single A Visceral Wretch left me at least inclined to believe that this could be a possibility.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Absolute banger of a track that caught me completely off guard after the last two records. Notably, Hymns in Dissonance is a bit of a spiritual sequel to This Is Exile thematically. Telling the story of a cultist who is gathering followers, each track is meant to be a literal hymn, with tracks 3 through 10 actually representing the 7 deadly sins, minus the interlude. Rewinding back to the opener, Prisoner 666, this track also tears the damn walls down. There's something so tribal about it between the groove, the drumming, and Phil's vocal cadence. Kind of reminds me of like Soulfly. It goes deathcore in a way. Maybe my personal favorite track overall on the album, and speaking of Phil's vocals, he really goes for broke on the title track. Rapid fire, growls, screams, gutturals, and that evil chanting part is just so infectious. I get kind of like Behemoth vibes from that. Diabolic Slumber, which I assume is code for sloth, appropriately takes an at least partly slower, more atmospheric approach, though no less heavy. It feels like they took lessons learned on the last two records and then combined it with the old style. Hate Cult Ritual is another personal standout with some seriously killer breaks and transitions, along with another earworm vocal hook. And after the big doomy intro, the abysmal Gospel is a powder keg of D-beats and blasts. Bedlam is a big lumbering kaiju of a track that sounds like it's stomping through the city and breathing fire, followed by more big atmosphere from the also appropriately titled Mammoth God. The only real ounce of melody on this entire album is the epic solo that makes up a pretty big portion of closer Nothing Is Coming for Any of Us. Really strong album, not sure yet if I could give it top billing, but I definitely dig it more than the last two and consider it a return to what I really personally want from this band. I am going to put it at fantastic, and maybe even third best. It's somewhere in there. Y'all check out this playlist for more deathcore rankings, or this for your personal YouTube recommendation, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.